Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis, and today we've got an interesting interview. I'm super excited about it. I've been looking forward to this for a couple of weeks now, and we're going to talk about human trafficking. We're going to talk about victims of violence and sexual violence, pornography, all the hard things. So if you're jumping in on this episode, it's going to be pretty heavy. So I do want to give a trigger warning to people that, if you have, this kind of stuff in your past or that you haven't dealt with, it can be a little dysregulating and upsetting. So, also, if you don't want your kids to hear this, don't listen to it while you're driving around in the car. But, the reality is these things are difficult to talk about, think about, process, but we've got to, and it's going on in our world. It's going on around us. And so I have got a special agent with me who is going to be talking about his role as a police officer and a person who works behind the scenes undercover in these areas. And I'm not going to list his name unless he wants to list his name, but that's what we're going to be talking about. So strap in. I hope it's going to be a good one. So let's do it. So welcome, man. Glad to have you on. Kind of tell us who you are and what you do, and let's go from there.
I appreciate that. I work for the Texas Department of Public Safety, which is across the Louisiana border from you guys. I worked there for going on right at 18 years now, and work for, a lot of people don't know, but the Texas Department of Public Safety, a lot of them know them as the Highway Patrol, and that's usually what they are known for. But the state police also has an investigative unit, and that's who I work for, which is called the Criminal Investigation Unit, and I work for them. Been doing that for about 12 or 13 years as an investigator, and I've really enjoyed it. So that's kind of where I'm at and what I do. And we work a multitude of different things out where we're at. Organized crime is what usually kind of encompasses all types of investigations. And for probably the past 7 years, I've done crimes against children and human trafficking cases. Probably about 95% of my work is crimes against children or human trafficking, and all the things that those encompass. And so that's what I do and where I work and kind of what I get to do on a daily basis.
Yeah. So tell me how you got into that. Like, did you become a state trooper first, and then
Yes.
and so tell me that story. Like, how did that?
Yeah. So for Texas DPS, everyone that comes on board is going to be as far as the police officer side of things, they're going to be a trooper first, no matter what you plan to do with the rest of your career. You have to be a trooper first. So you have different divisions within the department. The Highway Patrol Division, which everybody has to go to first. And then you can move into different divisions like the Texas Ranger Division, the Criminal Investigation Division. We have a Driver's License Division. And then within those units, you have your own chain of command, so to speak, within each one of those. And then, so everybody starts out in the Highway Patrol Division. You go be a trooper, and you can promote into the Criminal Investigation Division like I'm in 4 years, and begin that process. The Texas Ranger Division, for instance, you have to be at least have 4 years on with the Highway Patrol, but you have to have a total of 8 years law enforcement. So theirs are a little bit different than ours. But we do investigative work, and there's a lot of similarities between the two. But so depending on which division you go into, the requirements may be different. But
Gotcha.
for ours is 4 years on the Highway Patrol, and then you can promote into CID for short, Criminal Investigation Division. That's what I did. Spent a year out west, and then I eventually got back home here. Now, with that, we have organized crime is what our group is called, and we do all kinds of things from narcotics investigations all the way up to, of course, what we're talking about today, human trafficking and crimes against children and all those type things. And so my career kind of took a turn back in 2017, I think it was, where I was mainly working narcotics and went in, got a crimes against children case. Didn't really know what I was doing and getting into, but didn't necessarily like the content, but I like catching the bad guys that want to hurt children. So for me, that was kind of a big turning point, a moment, if you will, that was like, oh, this is a thing, and if we want to catch these guys, what do I need to learn and do to become an investigator that can catch people that want to hurt children? I mean, that was essentially my thought process on the situation, and my career just kind of went that way, if you will, and so that's where it took the turn, and I've been doing it ever since. So and still do it, but that's
Yeah.
kind of.
That's incredible, man. I mean, I thank you so much for doing the work and for what God has put on your heart to do. And because it's few and far between people who can handle that, who can work with that. As we were talking about before, I worked with Purchase for many years, helping women and children, especially out of human trafficking. And guys like you would work the cases, they would catch the bad guys, and then we would take the victims and work with them, and still do, and help them recover and help them find healing. I speak at it's like the Northeast Conference every year during July over here in Shreveport, and I get to talk about Johns and how does somebody become a pimp and how does somebody become a trafficker, and try to really shine a light on how we can do some prevention on the demand side. And it's an interesting dynamic because, obviously we do not like traffickers and we do not like perpetrators, and we want to make sure they get consequences. But then there's this other side of understanding how did these boys, these men or women become these people who kind of traffic people and have that worldview. And so there's just so many dynamics that play into all of that. So how, when you went into kind of protecting children and all those kind of things, what does that cover? What are some of the things that you do and see and that maybe our listeners need to be aware of that are going on around us that you deal with?
Sure. Probably one of the major, at least the things that I've heard, major issues that people have or the public has is the fact that there's a difference between human smuggling and human trafficking. A lot of people get those two mixed up, and the difference between smuggling is that it's getting people into the United States illegally, and the whole scene that we have here in Texas with the border of Mexico and all the things that go along with that. And
There's a problem there.
yeah, there is. Believe it or not. Well, there, but that's the main thing is the difference between smuggling and trafficking. Is smuggling, people are trying to get to America or trying to get it in here, and they're paying to get here, and they're being smuggled in that sense. And the difference between that and trafficking, or trafficking victims don't. I just don't believe that women wake up every day going, oh, you know what I want to do? I want to go have sex for money with 10 or 15 different people. I just don't think that people grow up with those goals in mind. And so
Right.
you're looking at what seems to have come about is what's called a victim-centered approach, and that is the difference of, we used, as law enforcement, used to just kind of work cases and go about it without the concentration and focus being on the victims, and have really turned a corner in the fact that there's nobody that really wants to be in that world and wants to be victimized. And how do we treat them as law enforcement to help them become, either get back to where they were as far as a great member in society, and not being victimized anymore, and get them to a healthy life that they can, have a job and do things on their own, and help them along the way, and that being the concern, being the victim. So it kind of transitioned into that over time, I think, and the course of my career have seen that change. And so that, for me, that was a big deal, and the focus of a victim-centered approach in our investigative world and investigations as we and how we treat them in the law enforcement world as we work the cases.
Yeah, it's a big
So,
deal.
so that's kind of the two, probably the biggest misconception of, oh, when I see human smuggling or human trafficking, and a lot of people mix those two words, and they're just not the same, and that's the difference between the two. So that's one of the common misconceptions with just society in general. Um,
Yeah, so you see people getting smuggled over, right? Maybe there's a coyote or somebody who's helping move people over the border. They come over for work or just to get away from whatever place they're in, but they're not being sold or they're not being traded or they're not being abused. And then
yeah,
you have people
yeah,
who are literally being taken over to be sold, to be used to make money.
yeah. Those things for sure happen. Now, do those lines cross? Sure, they do.
Right. Yeah, there's
Yeah,
a Venn diagram, right?
in a lot of cases, you got tons of kids coming over without parents and without family members, and we those lines are going to get crossed because maybe they're trying to be smuggled, and now all of a sudden they find themselves victimized and victims of human trafficking. So it's not like those lines don't cross. I believe they do, but those are the differences between those.
When you say there's a bunch of children coming over without parents, how is that? How is that happening?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is obviously in the news too. You can obviously look through that. And I sure don't want to take up the podcast talking about those issues, but those do happen. I mean, you can see them coming across, and that's seen on a daily basis, I would think. Of course,
Yeah.
we don't work at the border all the time. We do go down there on stints, um, but yeah, that it happens.
Yeah, I'm
Come
sure.
across and ship them to family members that are already here or whatever.
Got it. Got it. So typically it'd be a parent sending a kid across to somebody who's already here,
Yeah,
or they've taken some kid and are going to traffic them across the border.
sure. Yep.
Yeah. So okay. So then, what else do you do as far you deal with the border? You deal with that, and then what are some other issues that you're seeing online in person that are really affecting kids? And
Well, traffickers are going to look for victims that are easy to be trafficked, or you know I say this, that whenever you think about a victim and a trafficker sees the same thing we see, and I've interviewed tons and tons and tons of victims, and they say the same thing, and a lot of them say this. I remember one victim in particular told me, she said, "You don't know what it's like to not know if your water is going to be shut off, or not know if there's going to be food on your table." And when I was interviewing her, she said that. I looked at her and I said, "You know what? You're right. Like I've never had my water shut off in my life. I haven't experienced that." And so we had to be careful of going, "Oh yeah, I know what you mean." Well, I really don't know what you mean. And victims can see that and they know if you're being truthful or not. And so, and I just turned to her and said, "You know what? You're right. I don't know what it's like." But what I realized was, here she is having, you know, a young person in this world worrying about whether or not her water was going to be turned off, or whether or not she's going to have food or clothes, and worrying about things that young girls shouldn't be worrying about. They should be having fun with their friends and doing things that are typical, American girls should be doing, going out to the mall or movies or whatever, instead of worrying about those things. And they find themselves looking for either a relationship or love or someone to just care for them and trust, in somebody they can trust. And what they end up finding is somebody who has just the opposite in mind. And those traffickers, prey upon that. And we as law enforcement call those basically, if it's children type cases, high risk threat to children. That's kind of the term we use. And the bad guy or the trafficker is just that, a high risk person that wants to victimize people and for his or her own benefit. And so they prey upon the ones that, children are don't have a mom and dad at home, and don't have, they're out on the streets by themselves, or out in apartment complexes somewhere where they're just hanging out on the sidewalk. And they look for people like that, and choose to victimize those, because they're going from a point where they have to worry about food
basic needs.
basic needs, clothes, shelter. Now you got this person going, "Hey, I'll buy you a house, and I can provide you all the food you want, and I can have your hair done for you and your nails done for you, and here's the latest and greatest iPhone and the favorite purse that you've always wanted." And all of a sudden they're being given these things that, essentially in their mind make them successful, or, help them out in life. And that's what it's common terminology for them to help them come up and be who they really want to be. And the whole time they're being, victimized by the trafficker. And so they look for young people like that, either on the streets, like I just described, around apartment complexes, or, obviously more commonly on Snapchat, TikTok, and Facebook, and all the latest and greatest apps out there where they connect with people instantly, Instagram. And when you see these other girls, flying around the country and going on these quote unquote your exotic vacations, and having all this fun and glamorous lifestyle and lots of money, it's easy to say, "I want that too."
Yeah. Do you think there seem to be two categories, the based on socioeconomics, right? Like you have the poor, around the apartment complex. They don't have basic needs. They need, food, water, shelter, and they kind of move up Maslow's hierarchy of need up into like, oh, you're a part of a family and you're part of a system and you have purpose and you have meaning. And obviously that's all very broken and filter from the trafficker or the manipulator or the groomer. So you have that. And then you switch over now, though, with social media, that's opened a whole new door of middle to upper class kids who get into this because, emotionally they're still looking for the same thing. They're looking for a father figure. They're looking for somebody to mentor them and to love them. They have all their basic needs met, but now they're seeing, like you said, these lavish lifestyles where people are flying them out to Vegas, they're flying them to different places and locations, and they get caught up in this lifestyle. So how have you seen that change in your career in the last decade? And what do parents need to really understand about these apps? Because I think a lot of parents will tend to minimize and go, oh, it's not that big of a deal, not my child. And yet it seems to be kind of across the board.
Yeah, that is for sure changed across the board. The social media has changed everything as far as that's concerned because they, you know, young women especially, I mean boys too, but they're going to compare themselves to someone else, and just like we always say in the social media world of everybody always posts their great vacation and how much fun they're having in life, but they don't tell you behind the scenes of,
Right.
what it's like, doing all the things at home that most families struggle with and deal with on a daily basis. And so it's easy to have that misconception and on the social media world that, and kids do the same thing, even though they, like you said, it might have started with people on the lower socioeconomic background, but now, translates to everyone. We have seen cases where, you know, kids got all their school paid for, or maybe they're in college doing their own thing, and now I can make some extra money over here with this guy, and selling themselves or working in the clubs and nightclubs places, just to make extra money while they're in college or whatever. So yeah, definitely have seen and I would say uptick in that just because of that influence through social media and the applications along with it. So one of the kind of the rules I have, or not that I have, that has been told to me that helps. I guess I do have it too, but
Yeah. It's now become your
you know,
rule.
but like if the mom and dad aren't on the application, the kids don't need to be on it, because if you don't know how it works or operates, or you know the things that can be done with it, a lot of parents just had the kids out, running with their devices and doing their own thing, and had these applications that aren't, the parents have no idea what they can and can't do with it. So, I think that that's important, that, hey, if the kid's going to be on it, the parents need to be on there as well. It's just kind of you know, a good rule to have at the house. But,
Absolutely. Yeah. I just got back from DC a couple weeks ago, and I got to meet with Judiciary Committee, Blackburn, Cassidy, Kennedy, Speaker's office about all of this stuff and legislation, and kind of the two arms of what I was pushing. I wrote a book, and they wanted me to bring it and talk through it and all those kind of things. But the prevention and the recovery part, and it's like we have to legislate some of this. And one of the argument I made was, we have driver's license and we have gun control by making people take either a hunter safety course or a concealed carry or whatever, because we don't want to leave these technologies or these inventions up to society. Like, yes, we're in a capitalist free America, but like, you can't just make a car and then say, okay, well, now that we've made the car, anybody can use it. If you want to you're a parent and you have autonomy, so if you want to let your 12-year-old drive it, good luck. And yet with the phone and with the internet and the computer, it's this technology that like has such a huge impact on our society, and puts children in all of these exposed, terrible situations. And yet we don't equip parents on how to use that technology in a safe way. We don't tell them, let's say, the hunter safety rules. We don't give them the rules of the road. We don't tell them the dangers. We don't tell them the risk factors. And then, make sure they know these and have tested on these, and like, have an ID or have a card that allows them to say like, hey, yeah, I've trained my kid to use this technology in the safest way possible. Of course there can be wrecks. Of course somebody can shoot somebody on accident. That's going to happen. But currently in our society, it's just a free-for-all. And man, it's just impacting our kids so much. And then the other side is the accountability for the producers or the distributors of this content, and of these things. It's like, man, you can't go to a bar and drink alcohol at 18, or the bartender will get a ticket. And yet all these, companies can produce this content and have low age filters and have no restrictions and just distribute it to our children and our families with no accountability. And, Twitter, for example, all you have to be is 13, and yet there's hardcore porn, there's trafficking, there's adults who can message you and DM you. And so parents are 10 years behind knowing any of that information. And we've just seen the devastation that that's wreaked on
Yeah.
our children and our
Yeah.
society as a whole.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. What some of the cases I've noticed, some of the cases we work, you'll see the bad guy essentially casting out a big net, if you will, and you got to think he might message 100, 200 people, just boom, boom, boom. Hey, want to hang out? Want to go hang out at the mall, whatever. You want to come take a ride out and to Texas, want to come chill or whatever the circumstance is. And you think, oh man, there's no way that works. Like
Yeah.
who would fall for that? And these young people are just they just do, and that's something that I had to learn on the investigative side is like, unfortunately, kids do fall for that. And if you cast this big net out, you're liable to catch one or two, depending on how many you message. And the next thing you know, that's all they're looking for is that one or two, and that's all it takes, unfortunately. But um, for them to be victimized, and so that's what you see the bad guys doing essentially. And it's easy to cast their net out now by hitting, send, 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 send on the messenger, and a lot of them are encrypted, and some messages you can and can't get back depending on the platforms. But it's sad to think. I still remember thinking on a particular case that I worked, thinking, man, there's no way this is going to work. As you're reading through the messages, and it's like, oh, the next thing you know, it did work, and now the kid's meeting this, adult, and it's just amazing. Unfortunately, that I don't know. It was just something that surprised me as an investigator, just realizing like, oh man, that method actually does work.
Yeah, especially for those people you talked about that are very vulnerable.
Sure.
We're not talking about kids. Well, I mean, this is up for debate, and kind of what I'm trying to push to parents is, it's right now it feels like all of our kids are vulnerable because
Oh yeah.
about 90% of parents have no rules for devices. So if you don't have any rules for how your kid uses social media, like you said, if you don't have an app that blocks it, if you're not supervising it and training them and equipping them on how to use these things, then your kid is at risk. Now, are they at as much risk if you like have a healthy family and you communicate? Well, no, they're not at as much risk, but they're still at a high level of risk. I think, and you might know this better than me, but it's like 72% of kids receive a solicitation online. Less than 25% of them tell their parent, and 50% of them respond.
Yeah.
So you're talking about half the kids that, I mean, they may not get trafficked, but they're responding to strangers on the internet. It's like if you're in Target and you walk around the aisle and your 7-year-old's talking to a strange man that you don't know, what are you going to do? You're going to go over there and be like, "Hey, dude, why are you talking to my kid? Like, what did he tell you? What's up? Like, what's happening? Did you, But if it's on the internet, it's perfectly fine."
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, I'm very open with the way I talk to my kids just because of what I do, obviously.
Yeah.
But still, I still think, man, I ask my kids that all the time. Now if this stranger comes up and talk to you, what do you say? Do the typical question to my kids, and I still. You just don't know what they're going to do in those situations, and
They're kids.
even someone like myself that talks to my kids all the time about these type things. I still think there's a chance. There's a chance, because there's that socioeconomic background has been crossed so many times. No matter how old you are, what race you are, if you're a child, even young adult, younger kids, sure that they might talk differently or might be more prone to reach out to a parent depending on age, but um, I still think that that's a possibility in my mind of my own children who we talk about it all the time, and so.
Oh yeah, I mean they've done these studies now where they've videotaped, and followed the average kid. They just pick a person and they're like, okay, we're going to call this kid at the park and we're going to see what he'll do. And obviously it's a safe situation at that time, but man, the kid will go get in the car with somebody, or they'll keep the secret. And lo and behold, the parents never had that conversation. They've never talked about a safe word. They've never given them any kind of training or equipping on what to do in those moments, because of course the parent is, they're overwhelmed, they're stressed out, they're doing their thing, and they don't think this is not something the average parent thinks, oh, I need to talk to my kid about this. It'll never happen to us.
Yeah. And one of I teach as part of Texas Department of Public Safety in a class they created is called Interdiction for Protection of Children. We go around we go around the world, literally the world, essentially teaching the class and around the United States for sure. But within that class, one of the highlights that we talk about is we have to stop waiting for children to say, "Hey, I need rescued. I need help. I'm
Right.
being abused at home." Children are just not going to say that. They're just not. And if we as law enforcement on traffic stops sit around going, here's a kid in the back seat, for instance, and well, they didn't say anything, and we could give you example after example after example when a trafficker or a bad guy that abuses a child is sitting, right in front of a police officer, talking to a police officer, and they still don't outcry or say, "Hey, I need help." And we as law enforcement have to stop waiting on children to go, "Hey, I need help and I'm being abused at home." And
Hmm.
you need to ask more questions because kids aren't going to do that. They're not going to say they need help. They're not going to say they're being abused. They're not, like you said just a minute ago in the statistics, that there's a vast majority of them that don't tell their parents. They're not going to. And if we as parents even think that kids are going to tell us every time they've talked to someone online that they shouldn't have, or in some cases where they share images of themselves online, and the next thing you know they're being extorted for money, or whatever the case is, they're not going to just come to their parents and say that unless something happens and they need to. I mean, I've seen cases where they do, fortunately. And but if we're sitting around as parents or law enforcement saying, "Oh yeah, the kid will tell me," we have to understand that the kids are not going to. And we have to stop expecting that of them.
Yeah, I mean, they're not developed enough to even think or know, emotionally, spiritually, physically what to do with that. And if we've never talked to them about it before, then they don't have any kind of game plan or any kind of, net to catch them when they fall and when they stumble. I mean, it's as easy as like pornography, for example. You know, we're so afraid to talk about it and have a conversation about it, even though it's on every billboard and everywhere we go. So we don't tell our kids, like, if you see a good picture or a bad picture, or what the difference is in those things, and if you see it, what to do. There's a great book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
I've only heard because of your recent podcast,
oh, nice.
but I thought I need to look that up. So
Yeah, so it's great. I mean, it helps kids understand, like, good pictures are things like, rabbits and bunnies and toys and boats, and bad pictures are nude people, naked people online, and not because nudity's bad, but because people shouldn't take pictures of people's private parts and share them. And if you see a bad picture online or in a magazine or on a billboard, you should turn, cover your eyes and come and run and tell an adult. And just that little process, right? Like, it helps kids to have a framework for what to do when they see something online. But if you don't have that conversation and then they are online, which inevitably they will see something inappropriate, they have no clue what to do. And so kids hide and feel ashamed and feel curious. And they have all these emotions going on that then they're not going to go tell a parent because, the parent has already communicated, we don't talk about these things. And so there's a huge risk for a kid to come forward and say, "Hey, I allowed this to happen," or "I put myself in this position," because, right, typically the kid made a mistake. This adult took advantage of that mistake, and now the kid feels like it's their fault. And usually the traffickers, blame them, shame them, talk
sure.
them into believing that. And so tell me about that. Like, how much do you guys deal with kind of catfishing, where a kid will think it's another kid and send pictures and then
Oh
get kind of
man,
caught up in that? Is that
man, that has really changed. I remember it not being that big a deal. I still remember the first interview. I was interviewing this girl, and we had arrested her for, I think it was a drug charge. And I still remember her phone going off, and it was Snapchat. And it was like when Snapchat first came out. And I still remember looking at that little ghost on her phone going off. And I said, "What is that?" And she said, "That's Snapchat." And when she was telling me this when the app first came out, and I still remember in my brain saying, "Oh, that'll never catch on. It's just another app. It's just another, thing kids are using, whatever." And I was wrong about that. So it's stuck around. So, but what I've noticed over the years is the fact that, kids, it is so common for them to send pictures of themselves to one another at school. And like, they, to them, unfortunately, it's just not a big deal. And it's sad to, their self-image
and when you
is
mean pictures, you mean nude
yeah,
pictures?
nude pictures, yeah.
Yeah.
And so when they send nude pictures to one another there at school, it's, and what they don't realize is that, not only is it morally not right, but it's
Right.
it's a violation of the rules and the laws that we have, but mainly because of their age, depending on their age. Um, but I've just noticed that it's just so common for kids to do that these days, and they just don't understand the implications of it. And sure, the boyfriend's got it now, but he's also going to show all his buddies. And if you don't know that or understand that, that's something that just getting children to respect themselves. To hey, that's that's not cool. You can't do that.
Yeah,
And
it's
it's just so
consent,
common.
right? Yeah, it's
Yeah,
teaching our kids about consent and about privacy, and again, it's a new world we live in. And so when we were kids, maybe somebody flashed somebody at a sleepover or at a camp out or at a thing, and now, yeah, people can just take a picture of it and send it. They can airdrop it. I mean, that's one of the things that happens a lot is, they'll
sure.
airdrop, like, boys especially think it's funny to, take a dick pic or a penis pic and send it to, people on a plane,
Yeah,
and they can just take their picture and send it to whoever they want to. And it's crazy that is the culture that we live in, that they can do that.
yeah.
And it's perfectly fine and normal and funny. Now, boys probably have done that for years, prepubescent and teenagers, because they don't understand the harm, they don't understand what it is. They may be silly and just gross and ridiculous. But now their ability to send that and compromise other people is extrapolated, 1,000 times, a million times.
Sure it is. Yeah. And to answer your question, and I don't think I did that well, but the when Snapchat, I was using that example just because it became more prevalent. But I remember as my over the last couple of years after that particular case I told you about, I started just getting phone calls like every week, probably two or three phone calls of this scenario. My kid was talking to this person online. They sent them pictures. Now they're calling back saying, if you don't send me more pictures, I'm going to upload these to your Facebook, and here's your Facebook or here's your Instagram. And if you don't send them send me money right now, I'm going to post these online, and I know who you are and where you live. And I bet I had that phone call two or three times a week for many months in a row.
Mm.
And it's just impossible as investigators, just impossible to work all those. Now, some of them we've worked, and it's worked out great, and you catch the bad guy. But it became so prevalent in our world, just with applications and phones, or with AirDrop, just like you're saying. It's very common. So, you know, to see that transpire over the course of the last few years has been interesting. Just to see how easy it is for kiddos to send nude images of themselves online, and to people they don't know. Building trust. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, the stats I think are like 26% of girls have sent a nude picture to somebody,
yeah.
and like 30 something percent have nude pictures on their phone right now.
Mm.
So that's the other part, is that they don't understand that, that the what's it, the cloud is someone else's computer.
Somebody
Like,
has access to that.
yeah, like it's wild what people are doing with their phones. I
Yeah,
told some kids the other day, like, if you take pictures of yourself naked and then you delete those pictures, and somebody gets your phone, you get rid of it, they can, download an app that re-uploads everything that you've deleted.
yeah,
And they were like, what? And I'm like, yeah, like you really can't get that stuff
yeah.
off of your phone.
It never goes away. When we teach in schools or wherever, if we go somewhere and we're visiting with children, underage, especially underage minors, high school, younger high school students mainly, and they, I tell them that, when you look over, think about the example of them taking a selfie, and they're going to take, they get their phone in their hand and they're going to take 10 selfies because they got to get their lips just right, and they got to be standing with their chin stretched out just enough, and their tummy tucked in, or whatever the case is. And they take 10 of those, and then they find that perfect one, and then that's the one they're going to send to all their friends or upload on Snapchat, or whatever. And what I tell them often is, hey, just because you deleted them off your phone, they never go away. And if you think about that, and how they're either uploaded onto the cloud, or just stored on that particular device or whatever, I have them raise their hands. Who all thinks those, the other nine pictures went away? And of course, all of them, yeah, I do. And they just don't. And so, getting people to realize that and understand that, especially young people, it's difficult. In that world, they just don't. I don't know if it's just because they don't care, or they just lack that self-respect to not send nude images, and then a lot of them just don't understand. They think it goes away forever, and it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to that is like it's a parental issue. I mean, it's a guidance, it's a discipleship, it's a teaching and education and equipping issue. And we didn't get that for three generations of people. Our parents did not talk to us about any of those things. And then now we have a transition into cell phones and social media. And now our ability, the heart's not different. We're not worse people than we were 20 years ago. We just have the capability and ability to spread that stuff at light speed. And there was a story a few years ago about a kid on Twitter that had sent his girl a picture or a video. I think he was masturbating or something, and she shared it on Twitter, and it had 1.5 million views before Twitter took it down, and he killed himself. It's like those are the things that we see in our society now that the average kid can be a part of. That 10 years ago it had to be this kind of niche group of kids who really struggled and really suffered, and now it can be anybody.
You sure can. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. At the end of our class, the IPC class that I mentioned earlier, Interdiction for Protection of Children, we talk about that the very thing that we need to be doing on a daily basis is telling our kids how much we love them and care for them and appreciate them and encouraging them. And because if we don't do it, somebody's going to, and
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, they don't have good intentions for the children. So that's what we could do as parents, being there and telling them and leading them in the right way on a daily basis.
Yeah, tell me more about that class. So does that you guys go into schools? Where do you go to do
No,
that?
it's mainly for law enforcement.
Okay.
It is uh, Texas Department of Public Safety puts it on, and it's free to law enforcement. They don't have to pay anything, which that's always a good thing in the law enforcement world.
Yeah, nobody's got any money.
Free, yeah. If it's free, that's good. Yeah,
And is
but
that just for Texas or is that all over?
it's all over, but it's mandatory for Texas police officers to take it, and several other states as well. And it's basically this: that you're a law enforcement officer. You're now other people can go too if you work anything to do with children, and so we have some people like from nonprofits go there and go attend the class, and lawyers, even like district attorneys. I mean, and anybody that works with victims, essentially with children. But the idea is that you're already out doing your work and stopping cars and finding bad guys. And what we realized with it in our world was we had all these stats on marijuana and cocaine and guns and all the stolen cars seized, but nobody could tell us, how many children we recovered or helped, or, and victims of either being trafficked or, uh, kids that were out, being harmed and abused at home even. And here they are in these traffic stops, and we had no way to calculate that. So in 2009 was the very first time this class was put out. I actually went to the first class myself and later on became an instructor as well. But the idea is that we ask all these questions, and you know whether or not you're hauling drugs and all that, but we forget to ask about the kid in the back seat and what their story is, and understand that we could be have a kid that's being abused right here in front of us on a traffic stop, or that we encounter in the law enforcement world, and what we say is a high risk threat to children, that is sitting right there in the front seat right next to them. In many cases, could be even a family member to the child. And to start asking those questions and looking for those suspicious behaviors on the traffic stop that might indicate that the child is at risk or about to be at risk, or,
Mm-hmm.
and could potentially be harmed. So, and then just having that, once we do recover a child, having a victim-centered approach with the recovery of the child, and then obviously the arrest of the bad guy, if that's the case. But just looking for those suspicious indicators on traffic stops. That's generally what the class is about.
Yeah.
But
Do you think a lot of that, I think it's a huge shift and a great shift to victim centered, focus. And I think the average person has doesn't even think about this, but it's like, we watch movies and film and books and these narratives about prostitutes and strippers and, all these things, which, can cast them in a very much like, either you're just the scum of society or well, they want to be doing it anyway. And the big shift has been looking at like who goes into trafficking, understanding like the ACEs scores, adverse, childhood experiences where they have trauma before they've even,
Sure.
gotten into it. I know in Purchased, I think the stat was something like 98% of the women who went through Purchase, which is hundreds of women, had abuse before six. Sexual abuse happened before six. It was so people don't just end up in trafficking or end up in, as a sex worker without trauma. Now, in Shreveport, I've said that in an article, and I've had the Sex Workers Guild come and say, "Oh no, that's not true. Most sex workers are healthy and just normal people, and this is just how they choose to do their life." What do you what do you say to that, or what have you seen as a law enforcement agent in that realm?
Well, I've interviewed lots and lots of them. I haven't found one yet that goes, you know what I want to do? I want to grow up one day and be a stripper. Not one has ever said that.
Yeah,
I just don't think women think like that, especially as a young woman. Most cases, the young women are thinking about who they're going to marry one day and how many kids am I going to have and all the things that young girls should. They don't think, I tell you what I want to do. I want to get up and go take my clothes off in front of people, strangers.
yeah.
I just don't see that.
It also doesn't make any sense psychologically. Like, in order to I mean, most people don't want to give a speech or do a podcast in front of people that people have to listen to without having a panic attack. Like, I mean, you think it's possible for a human being to take all their clothes off in a group of strangers that they don't know, especially men? So that's the interesting thing about like feminism, and I say feminism is an extreme, not the healthy version, but the extreme version that we have now in our culture, where it's empowering for women to talk certain ways or dress certain ways or act certain ways, and yet it also contradicts what we know about psychology. And it's like, okay, so have you seen recently the TikTok about like man in the woods or bear in the woods? Have you seen that?
No, I have not.
So there's this thing that's going around, and they ask women questions. Would you be more terrified if you were in the woods hiking by yourself and there was a man or a bear? And a large majority of the women say, "Oh, I'd be more terrified if there was a man." And so there's this interesting conversation about that, because you get half the dudes who are super offended, and then you get half the side that's extremely progressive that's like, "Yeah, men are terrible and awful." And it's like there's this middle ground where it's like, well, no, like if you're a woman in the woods and you're not as strong as the man, he can do all kinds of things to you, right? You don't know what he's going to do, how he's going to do it. And you have all these negative experiences with men in your life that add more fear to being alone with a man in the woods. Versus a bear, you got a chance that the bear won't, if it does attack you, you're getting eaten, 100% that. But then you have this whole percentage where maybe it won't, it'll probably leave you alone if it doesn't have any cup, right? Like,
Yeah, 50
so there,
50.
yeah, yeah. And so it's like, I empathize with that idea that, man, doesn't that speak to our culture for women that they just feel so unsafe with men? That doesn't mean that every man is unsafe, but it does speak to this exact thing that we're talking about, that a woman feels like that, would say, I feel, the large majority of women would say, I would be more terrified to be in the woods with a strange man, than a bear. And it's a very progressive left wing ideology that goes, yeah, that's because men are unsafe and they've done all this trauma and it's so terrible and blah, blah, blah. Those same people would say it's perfectly fine for a woman to be a stripper or to be in the sex industry because it empowers her and she has a right to freedom and she can do these things. They want, they want people to it to be legal in Vegas for people to, be a prostitute and do this work, because they say that limits trauma and that limits the exposure. And it's like, but at the same time, you're asking women to be in the woods with a man that they don't know and they feel perfectly fine with that. It's like, which one is it? Is it 97% of women are scared of men? What do they do with their brain when they have to go stand on a stage and take their clothes off in a room full of men that they don't know, or go upstairs to the room with the man that they don't know? What do they have to do? Well, they have to disassociate. They have to turn their brain off and take their humanity completely out of it. And it's like, that's not good for women. That's not empowering for women. And so that's the problem that I see from a psychological perspective in our society that I don't feel like very many people are talking about. What do you think to that, or say to that?
Yeah.
And feel
Yeah.
free to push back. I mean, if you
Yeah.
disagree.
No, I agree. I see where, again, it just reverts back to, I just don't think women want to be in that situation, don't want to go there. And you can definitely see that when especially with the victims that we interview, and they're telling you about what they do on a daily basis, and you hear it like time and time again, and having to meet with all these people, and I just to me, I know that they don't want to be there, and how we can help them get out of that and change that mentality about building them up as who they are and the potential they have to be fully who they're called to be. And to do that, it takes teamwork. It takes people. I forget. There's this statistic about how many times it takes a victim to come out of the trafficking world. A lot of people say it's 7 or 8 times of
Mm-hmm.
being rescued and pulled out before they eventually, get away from the lifestyle.
Yeah, it's
But it
something like
takes,
70%.
yeah, it takes teamwork. It takes a teamwork to do the work that we do. Sure, we investigate crimes and can arrest bad guys, but I can't go and with every victim and say, here, I'm going to hold your hand and walk you through these next steps. And that's where it takes either, you know, nonprofit organizations that we link up with to help them with finding food, clothing, shelter immediately. Sometimes we've had them come out like on the side of the road with us,
Mm-hmm.
and hey, bring me, I need a pizza like right now. It's to
Yeah.
this address, and I'm gonna, meet you there. Or I need some clothes, or whatever the case is. And we've been very blessed here in Northeast Texas to have several nonprofit organizations that we link up with. And then on the backside of that, how do we continue that process with getting them help, like your job, counseling, and all of those things that go along with that, and helping them understand maybe the reasons why uh, they were victimized in the first place, and
Mm-hmm.
they can prevent that in the future. So
You guys partner with the Nest? Is that
that name doesn't sound familiar.
okay?
Don't think.
Okay.
Uh,
It's a nonprofit. It may be more over it may be towards Dallas or Houston. I can't remember. Yeah, one of the things that's been interesting working with Purchased and helping with them is, doing the John Stings,
yeah.
helping people, literally go in, do a sting, catch guys who were trying to buy, and then, showing you guys showing up, dealing with it, and then, the ladies going in and the guys driving them and going in and meeting with the victim, meeting with the kids, talking to them, being a safe person for them, advocating for them, and getting them to transition. And you're right, like so many of those, men and women, their instinct isn't, oh, thank you, you've saved me, you've rescued me out of the situation, let me come with you, right?
Yeah, never is it that way.
Right. It's like they're so indoctrinated into that lifestyle, and that's the only thing they know. And they feel like they cannot get away from that person. And there's so many links back to their life. It's like it's so easy for people to be like, just get out of the situation. It's like, but you're giving up your entire life, your friends, your community, the friends' dreams that you have about what you might or might not be able to finally get out and do. And then you have to move. Like you have to literally leave that situation and move because that pimp or that trafficker or those people are tied into that entire area that you're in. And you just live in fear for the rest of your life if you don't. And that's a big ask in the middle of a hotel room, when you're triggered and dysregulated and traumatized, and the police have probably not been very nice to you in your life.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. That's to get them to trust you, very difficult, and especially when you first meet them and deal with them. Yeah, and in Texas, I don't know how it is in Louisiana, but in Texas, it's now a felony, to be a buyer or a John, whatever you want to call them, whatever name they get. But if you purchase sex here in Texas, it's now a felony, and a lot of
Oh,
people don't
wow.
know
I
that
didn't know
changed
that.
a couple of years ago. Yeah, so
Yeah, it's not
we
in
do those John
Louisiana.
stings. I mean, it you're arresting these people, and they're like, do what? And it's a felony, and so it just shows that society is trying to deal with the problem. The problem is the buyers and the necessity for that in this world that are willing to pay people, in the trafficking world, not understanding that, hey, this girl's not even 90, I don't know what the statistic is, but 90% of the time she's not getting the money, or only
Yeah.
getting a very, very small portion. This trafficker is getting the money. And there's billions and billions of dollars spent worldwide on this very thing. And they're going to do things like, they're going to follow the big events around wherever the big events are, whether it be a Super Bowl or the Kentucky Derby or whatever the case is. That's where they're going to be going.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be around and trafficking people in those situations and following events around.
Yeah, so there's people who push back against that and say, "Oh, that's not true." I mean, you are a police officer. I mean, you see those things, right?
Sure, yeah, yeah. On a daily basis, we see them right here. If you have an interstate or a big major highway coming through, or even if you don't, I mean, we've had cases that come through where they, or it might be some small town. And we talk about that in the IPC training. Is that it can be small town USA. With we give an example of a police department that has three officers and one of the officers went to this training, and the next day, or within a few weeks, there recovers a child, and so you just never know. So we
So
recently,
one of the police came to the training and then went back to his
sure,
small town, and then because
yeah,
he had that insight and that knowledge, he,
yeah. So even if you don't have a major highway, is my point, that
yeah,
it can be happening right there anyway. And we taught the class in East Texas actually a few months back, and within 2 days, one of the officers in the class, rescued two
wow.
children off a traffic stop. Like I think it was either the day after the class was over, or maybe 2 days, and so that was pretty incredible. But
That is. I mean, it just goes to show that training and insight and awareness can really, really, I mean, make a huge impact immediately.
sure can, yeah,
Because and it also shows, man, how freaking common that is that
yeah,
you can do a training, walk out of the training, and the next day, bam, here we are dealing with the thing that we thought, oh, this might work in the next year.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, now that the IPC program, since the training began in 2009, we just hit. I forget the exact number now. It's over 600, but when we hit 600 child rescues, yeah, it's a big deal. I mean, that's 600 children's lives that have been changed forever. And
Yeah, and that's in what time frame?
it started in 2009, so yeah,
Wow. That's
15 years.
incredible, man. I mean, that's 600, yeah, humans that, can go on to have decent lives and get recovery and get help if we do all the right things that come after it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's the movement, that is important too, is that people listen to this who maybe feel like, oh, this is outside of like my world and my experience. It's not. Like you have the opportunity to find these nonprofits and give money to them or give support to them or be a part of them to come alongside law enforcement and help. It's kind of like the whole abortion debate. A lot of times people will, I don't want, abortion, but then they don't want to pay any tax dollars to help the families. They're pro birth, but they're not pro life.
Mhm.
And it's like, it's both. It's like we can have a good stance, but we do need to support the law enforcement and catching. It's great that we've caught 600 kids, but if those 600 kids don't get the resources and the trauma therapy and the recovery work that they need, then they just go on to have these horrible lives that are broken, and that they just see themselves as victims, and they end up victimizing other people, and the cycle continues.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you feel like, man, this is heavy, or this is just terrible, I can't believe people do things like this or involved in these things, like, then do something about it. Join something around your city, and find something online if you don't have anything in your city, and donate some money or shoot them an email and ask how you can, a lot of times, like, buy tampons, buy panties, buy clothing, give to these organizations things that are practical and that are needed, because every single day there are women and children who need these things to get out of this situation.
Yeah. Matter of fact, I'm in my office here. I'm looking at a box of a nonprofit organization brought it, and it has deodorant and a toothbrush and toothpaste and all kinds of things in it, and they're kits basically. Because they asked us, well, what do you need? Like, and the point is like when we run across victims, I need something to give them right then. A lot of times they need clothes, even if
Mm-hmm.
it's just a pair of sweatpants and a sweatshirt or something. Because if you run into them on on different operations, they might not be have clothes available or these items that are in these kits. So they just brought them by. I think a week, maybe 2 weeks ago, brought me this box. There's 25 of them. I think it was the next day we recovered a child, and got to use the kit like literally that quick. So you're
That's
right.
amazing.
If you don't have a place there locally to get involved in, I mean, just find one. I would reach out to your local police department and figure out, okay, what nonprofits are here and need help and need money donated, because you don't have to give to these great huge organizations. A lot of them are small nonprofits that need help and need people serving, and that's a great example of what just transpired within the last couple of weeks of somebody somebody provided all the things in each one of those kits. Somebody spent the money and purchased those items somewhere. So your calling might be to give money. It might be to get somewhere and be putting these kits together because it works. It happens. It happened just that quick. I think it was 2 days later after I had those kits in my hand, where here we are giving them
Yeah,
out. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I know.
that's what matters. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Is it Pegasus? Is that the large organization that's doing a lot of the app work? That is that? Is that?
I have heard that name, but I don't know any specifics of it.
Yeah, so Pegasus is doing they're the ones who put out the like texting. They have a nonprofit that they have people on call to answer text messages and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
Purchase has that now. So like the other day I was getting my hair cut and I went to the bathroom to use the bathroom, wash my hands, and I was at the sink and there was a little sticker on the window that said, if you're a victim of trafficking or someone's harming
Yeah.
you, call this number and we'll come get you right now. Like those are the things like you can be a part of. You just go put stickers places. Like you don't have to get in the mess, and if you can't handle the hard stuff, like get involved to do something. There's so much need, and this is such a problem, and I think people just want to put their heads in the sand and go, no, like it's not that bad. And it's like, no, it's really bad. Like this area statistically is our family members, our community, our resources are all getting depleted because of how people are treating other human beings.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm going to go save a victim of human trafficking. And a lot of people had this grand, idea that trafficking, and they're, that it's this abduction off the street, and you're at Target and you've been abducted, and that's all in the movies. And sure, those things happen, but it's just not as common as one would think. A lot of the problem lies right at home sometimes, or right at a lot of children are being abused by their family members at home on a daily basis, and we're going to church with them, we're going to soccer games with them, we're going to little league t-ball with them, and we need to listen to children and let them. We can't expect them to say, hey, I'm being abused, but we need to pay attention to what's going on in their lives or who they're around, because a lot of times it happens right at home.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. That's just my opinion, but it seems very prevalent in our society. So
Yeah, it is. I mean, it speaks to, if I can dive into just like Christianity for a second, it speaks into like what Christ calls us to do when it means be a community with one another and support one another and lean into these things. It's like if we're actually doing life with people, if we're on a baseball team, if we're on a soccer team, if we're on a swim team, our goal as Christians should be to be missional on that team, to be the light, to be the salt of the earth, to be the city on the hill, to live a life in which there's something like that happening, that we're a beacon of hope in that area, that someone would come to us and go, hey, I realize that you're not this type of person, or hey, you go to church, or hey, you talk about Jesus, or hey, how you treat your kids is different. We need help. And then we would be involved in those people's lives enough to look and see, hey, this kid's kind of dirty, or this kid gets yelled at a lot, or this kid's got bruises on them, or this kid, doesn't show up with their equipment. These are all these signs that I know, but like that people have. And a lot of times people are just like, well, I don't want to be involved. I'm not going to step on anybody's toes. Like I'm not going to, whatever. And it's like that's literally not what we're called to do.
yeah,
And so many people are, not peacemakers, but peacekeepers. They're like, man, I just want to keep the peace. I don't want any drama. I don't want any trouble. I'm just doing my own life with my own kid. And as long as I keep them safe, then I'm good. And that is not what we're called to do. We're called, like you, man, like you're stepping into places and making peace.
yeah,
And that's in Matthew, the Beatitudes. Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers.
yeah,
Like, and that's what you're doing, man. It's like you're going into situations and making peace for people, or as much peace as you can bring.
yeah.
And so I'm just so thankful for the work you're doing. I know that's got to be a heavy burden. So I want to just for a second, how do you deal with that? How do you carry that burden? And how can I be praying for you as we move
Yeah.
forward?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Listen, I don't do this job uh, for myself. I mean, I got into it a lot. And it sounds kind of cliche, just to help people, but I mean, really, that's what it's about. I didn't put myself here. There's lots of other avenues I could have went down. Like if you were to say, hey, in years to come, what are you going to be doing for a living? I wouldn't have, probably wouldn't have said this. Like it just, I'm very blessed to be a part of it. And it kind of, like I said, my career kind of went this route. It wasn't something that I really chose to do, but I believe that God has a calling on everyone's life, and we just called to step in it. And He provided the opportunity for me to be working here and doing what I'm doing. So, and if he doesn't want me here, that's fine too. So I just feel, uh, for me, it's all about um, how just taking a step and doing what it is you're called to do, no matter where it's at. Just take that step, because so many people are afraid to just move sometimes. And,
Hmm.
and it's, I didn't do anything special on any of the examples that I gave you today. I didn't do anything special when just went to work, and I got this job because I was put here. And so, I just, to me, it's a job that I was provided and an opportunity to help children just came. I wouldn't have put myself here years ago. Sure, I think if you were to ask anybody, you'd say, "Hey, do you want to help children one day?" And who's going to go? Nah, you know what? I don't want to help children. It's just I don't know, or victims in human trafficking. I wouldn't have necessarily chose that, but I think we're all called to do something, and just taking a move in that. And I've been very blessed to be part of a team with DPS, as a big picture, and part of that team and helping others. They've allowed me to do all kinds of great work, and have provided me that opportunity. And ultimately, I know that I'm here because I was put here for a reason. I had other plans, much like many people in this world. Talking to young folks, and you ask them. I tend to ask every young person I come in contact with, "Hey, what are your plans? What do you want to do when you grow up?" And they tell me, and then I typically say, when I find out what I'm going to do when I grow up, I'm going to let you know as well. And
That's right.
they laugh because you just never know. But I'm definitely blessed with having the opportunity to be where I'm at in this position, and I'm just thankful that it worked out. It worked out differently from what I expected, but that's okay, and
Yeah, hey,
that's part
that's
of it.
life, man. It
Yeah,
is
that's
part of
life.
it. I
So
laugh all the time when I do talks on, private parts or consent or body safety or parenting. I'm always like, look, I did never want to be the dude talking about penises and vaginas with you as parents. Nobody wants to talk about this. It's uncomfortable. Like it's a hard conversation. It's anti-culture. I didn't want to write a book about it. Like when somebody asked me what I wanted to be 10 years ago as a clinician, I would have thought like marriage and family and, whatever, working with this and that. But like you're right, God just continues to open doors and put you in places to deal with this stuff. And it's not shiny and popular, and it's not the thing that you see on television that people aspire to do, because it's not the thing that gets clicks and views and likes and celebrations. It's lonely and private, and you're kind of pushing against the culture and pushing against the flow of traffic, literally.
mm,
And at the end of the day, though, God is the blessing.
yeah,
He values what you do and what I do and what people in our roles do, and he provides the things we need, and he affirms us. And I don't know about you, but people say that all the time, like, how do you hear all this stuff and keep going? And it's like, well, because we get to also see those moments of success and those healing, those places of hope. You see, man, I know you do, but like a little bit of good can outweigh a lot of bad.
a lot of that. I was just sitting here thinking about some letters over here, that have been written over the years, and back, just thankful for our team that I work with. I have other agents here that I work with that are just, it's an incredible team, and come together, and they'll drop things at a hat to come out and help out, or and vice versa. And that's really what it's about. And to have those letters and going, hey, thanks. I really, I would be dead right now, in many cases, and they tell you that. And you're right. That one letter, takes away all the people complaining and yelling and screaming, and I hate police officers and this and that. Like, you can say all that you want, but over here, there's one life that's been changed, and I can prove it. And so, yeah, it definitely outweighs the negative for sure. So, and I usually tell people I hate the content that I had to deal with, but I like catching the bad guys. That's fun. So, that outweighs that sometimes, and it's definitely been a blessing.
That's awesome, man. Well, thanks for your time today. You got any closing thoughts or comments?
That's it for me. I appreciate it that there's other police officers out there that are listening. Or anybody that deals with children, and any crime victim services or anything, that the class Interdiction for Protection of Children is free of charge, and you can just Google it, and that's fine. And through Texas Department of Public Safety, and they can come present it, and
Yeah, will you send me a link for that, and I'll put it
Yeah,
in
I'll
the
send it to
notes
you.
so people
Sure.
can look for it and click on it. And yeah, I would just advise anybody who is interested to get that training. Like you
Yeah.
said, it's immediately going to help you. It's immediately going to produce, some success and some resources. We had a guy I trained jujitsu with. He's a police officer, and we always talk about. My instructor talks about that all the time. Like, you don't know what you don't know until it happens, and like it's just, I mean, it's so uncanny. But like every time we get a new cop, they come in, they learn some self defense. It's like within a week somebody's grabbing them in the store and they use whatever self defense move, and
Yeah.
they're like, oh, before this I would have been done my best to grapple them and get them to the ground, and been five of us on top of them, and now like, oh, just got him in a arm lock, put my knee on his belly and cuffed him, and got a couple scratches. But it's like, yeah, it's like anything else. You learn something, and all of a sudden your whole worldview opens up, and then you're using it before you even know it. So we'll definitely link that in there, and make sure that you guys have a place for them to come to, and hopefully we'll get you guys back on. I'd love to talk to you about your team and have them come in and just do a whole session just on what that is.
Oh yeah. That'd be
Maybe
great.
I could have a cop from Shreveport jump in too that doesn't know what it is and kind of stir some conversation, and that'd be fun.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, appreciate you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. Okay, well, thank y'all for listening. Show some support. Pray for these teams, for these cops, for these police officers who are helping out, and for these victims. I will definitely be praying for you. And thanks. God bless.